Hello and welcome to a training video over simple tiles and specifically their interactable options that we have available to them in decisions. Today we're going to talk about how we can set these simple tiles that are often used for just simply displaying information on a dashboard and how we can make sure that they actually have additional actions as opposed to just displaying information. So we're going to talk about a few different ways that you can build things with a couple simple build examples and then allow you to kind of get an idea of what to do with them and a couple best practices or things to consider when you are building with them. So first, let me go ahead and open up our page designer to show off the creation of simple tiles. So whenever you have a page, quite often people will take a simple tile, drag it usually into the default thing up top here, but obviously you can do it however you want to design it. And then simple tiles come with a flow that sources the data that will appear on the tiles. When you create a simple tile, or you can use simple tiles, we'll talk about that in a little bit, you get to create a flow that will contain a very important step called create tile data. And this tile data outputs a specific data type called tile data that gets sent to the end step, and this is how it is able to be displayed on the page. Now, a lot of people have seen them in a lot of our basic training concepts. We do some of these tile things where you can create just simple lines of data, sometimes static data, sometimes getting data from somewhere else, such as grabbing a report count, something from a fetch entities, maybe doing some calculations to sum up some total values or something, so that we can populate data onto that tile data. But one thing we don't talk about in some of our basic training because we don't want to overwhelm people, but I want to make sure that we share today is there's actually a setup option directly underneath the lines that you fill it with the information for actions. And we actually have the ability to create a number of different actions that this tile can have by clicking on it. Both clicking on it as well as on a right click. So left clicks and right clicks you can have configured so that it can do something whenever a user clicks on that field. And there's a bunch of different options to choose from, some really simple, some a little bit more complex, and allowing you to really build out different things that you want to build in decisions. So the first one I want to talk about is push data to controls. This is a little bit more of a complex one. What this one uses is it uses the concept of a data bus to send data into the URL so that you can actually change something that is appearing or something that is displaying on the actual page. So I can actually push whatever data that I want to, whether it's a simple string or something like that, for like an ID or something else, I can push it into the URL so that I can actually change one of my page controls. And so I actually have my first two tiles in this example utilizing this information as a demonstration to change the data that's on this report. So I will show off how I built that really quick. This is simply just making sure that we have the push data to controls tile action set. So by default, this is set to none. But when you want to use this, you go ahead and make it push data to controls. Once we have push data controls to set, we can give it our data bus name, make sure we know exactly what this is. Usually people will copy and paste it, anything like that. And then you'll also need to know what is the value that you want to push out of this step. Again, this can come from somewhere else. I just have constant data just to make this really easy, simple to demonstrate. And so what I can do is I can take that data bus name, take the data bus value, and now it's going to push that into the URL. If I go to my second simple tile here, I have another very similar thing where I'm just getting some data from the report, and then I have another report, a different ID here from a different report with the same exact data bus name and push data controls configured on this one. When I do that, I have a report that is actually not only having a report to display just by default, but I am also getting the report ID from a selection bus. And if I give it the same exact name that I provided in those simple tiles, what I can actually do is have this report change its ID, whatever the ID of whatever is being displayed here, depending on which simple tile a user has clicked. And that is the power of using this push data to controls. So I can push that data somewhere else, make sure I have another control here that can take in that selection bus to change or to display something in a different way. And then I can actually show that off. So if I go to my dashboard here, you'll see I have these two things, one that's counting all of my accounts in my system, one that's counting all of my groups. And when I click on one, it is going to change this report to display that data based on which one I click on. So if I wanted this to display my accounts, I click on that, it shows my accounts. If I wanted to show my groups, I click on that, it shows my groups. And so this is what the selection bus will allow me to do. And then I have a default report so that when I first open it, the first thing that will appear is the account report by default whenever you open that page. And so that's what push data to controls can do. I can just change that data of something in my page to display something a little bit differently. Now let's go to my next simple tile. This simple tile I have configured with the URL tile action. So this URL tile action allows me to just input some kind of URL so that when a user clicks on that tile, it'll navigate them to that specific URL. So in this example, I just have the decisions training website link open here. So then if I go to decisions, I click on that tile here, which just says go to training site, it'll send me directly to that URL. So then I can, register someone for training or whatever else that I might need to do, right? So that's how that one's going to work. Nice and simple. It just is providing a URL. Again, that can be static. It can come from data, whatever you need. The second example, or the third example that I have on my next simple tile is a run flow tile. So there's another one here. This allows us to pick a flow to run. So when the user clicks on this tile, it'll run a flow, right? Now this is very similar to how you might have a button, right? A run flow button on a page, right? You can have this run flow button here, but in order to change how this button looks, you're going to have to use things like CSS to adjust it. If you don't want to use CSS, or you just want some of the more configurable options of being able to change the backgrounds and everything like that that is built into the tile data, you can just do that with the tile data. So maybe it'll look a little bit different. You can also still have it populate instead of just saying submit purchase request to activate your flow or something. You can have it display more information like counts and other things like that. And so since we have the power of doing that, then we can change exactly how we like what exactly we are seeing. So here I can make it to maybe display some information. If I want to, I can make running this flow change this value if I was going to make any changes. But essentially by clicking on this, it's just going to run a flow that we have configured. And so I need to change some settings for that, but I can make this form appear that's part of the flow. Maybe a user types this in, and upon submitting it, it might change the data. But the basic idea here is that I just set some kind of flow. If you need flow inputs to be sent in, you can configure those as well to make sure that data gets sent into the flow if necessary, and whatever. And then you can have your flow being chosen here. This can also be dynamic. I have it static here by just simply grabbing a particular flow that I want, but then this will just make that form pop up for the user. So again, just the ability to run a flow, but also have still the full configuration of setting up what appears, setting up the background design or whatever of your tile so that it appears, in a different way as opposed to just a little button and the button that requires CSS to make changes to, things like that. All right. My last simple tile that I have an example of here is using the navigate option. So there's a navigate portal option upon left click that you can choose here. This one is somewhat similar to the URL option, but specifically navigating to somewhere within the decisions portal. So I provide a folder ID of where I want to navigate the user to, page name if necessary. If you have multiple pages within that folder and you want it to go to a specific page there, you could do that as well. That really only matters if you have multiple pages that you need to direct the user to. So what I have here is I have a folder ID for just the info page within decisions, within this decisions project. So then when a user left clicks on this navigate portal tile here, then they'll be able to navigate straight to the info page, this page here. So I click on it, left click it, it'll navigate me straight to my info page thing here. So I can have it navigate to other dashboards. I can have it navigate to other folders in the system, whatever it is, if you want to make things a little easier for users to navigate. And so all of these have the configurable options of changing the data that appears in here, in addition to having these clickable actions available to us. The only other ones that I didn't quite mention are entity actions and run run default action. So if you have other actions and things set up, like an entity action of some kind, you can put that ID through and have it run that action. So, if you're not familiar with it, uh, inside, for example, a case entity or some data structures configuration folders, you can add entity actions. So things like that, if you have some entity that has an action flow like associated with it, you can attach those to run through the tile data as well. So, instead of having to go to a case entity, right clicking it, and then clicking that action, you can actually just run it from the tile itself. So if you have a database, or sorry, a data structure dashboard here that's showing data details on a data structure, you want to run an entity action on it, you can do that as well. So that's the main actions that we have available to us. There's a couple things that we can highlight and kind of consider when you're building with these that you might want to take note of as you are building. And I actually have two examples here. I have two dashboards to show here. Here's one that just uses simple tile, and then a second one that uses simple tiles. You'll see they're virtually the same. You actually can't even see the difference. They do the exact same thing. They're configured in the same way. This is a major best practice when we talk about simple tile and simple tiles. In whenever you are building with them. So this is the one that I was demonstrating earlier where you have 5 separate simple tiles. I just did that to make it very easy to show. But the actual better habit that we want everyone to get into, if you want to have multiple tiles, use the simple tiles control here. The simple tiles control allows you to have just one flow, and that one flow will have multiple create tile data steps. These are all create tile data steps um, here. So every single one of these is a separate create tile data step, set up exactly the same as the individual ones that I was showing earlier. And the output is a list of all of those tile data steps. So you can either, build a list and pass that list in here. I just used build array to make it nice and easy to, show each individual one. But this allows you to actually set up with simple tiles exactly how you want them to behave and be displayed. And so you can change the view to set up the width of the tiles, any separator, like the separating space in between the tiles, right? So I can use the separator here to make sure that there's a certain width in between and gap in between each of these tiles. You can choose a color if that matters, whether it's horizontal or vertical. So if you can make it vertical so they would appear on stacked on top of each other instead of going across like this. So if you had simple tiles on a left side, for example, you could do that. But overall, simple tiles is more efficient than using a bunch of individual separate simple tile controls, because the individual simple tile controls is going to essentially create, in this example, 5 separate flows that have to run when you open up this dashboard. So you open up this dashboard, this flow runs in, this flow runs, and this flow runs, and this flow runs, and so on, right? But this one that uses the simple tiles control, since I can still set it up to have multiple pieces of tile data being created, it only has to run one flow, and that one flow can have multiple tile steps to generate the data. But just overall, it tends to be more performant, especially if the information that needs to get populated on these can change things. The other thing that's important to note is some of these actions will be refreshing your dashboard. So if you do have fairly beefy tiles that are causing a lot of slowdown in processing and things like that, or it takes a little while to do, if you're doing something like pushing data to another control that needs to refresh your page, it could take a while to do that. And the other thing as well is something like push data to controls. You'll see if I switch this, it refreshes this report viewer. If I had something else to refresh this page as well, or refresh this report viewer, like a folder change event set up to refresh things, you could also cause some more slowdown if it's trying to refresh things multiple times. So you just want to be a little careful of that, as you could receive errors and slowdowns with things if it's trying to refresh a lot. So having someone that clicks between these things really fast on a process that's really slow could also cause some issues. So just some things to be a little bit careful of, and you don't want to have all these things running over and over and over again if you have multiple flows like this and multiple tiles. So just kind of take that into consideration. But otherwise, that concludes the majority of our video that we want to discuss for here. So if you're curious about what kind of options you have, or maybe you've wanted seeing things like a run flow button or more options here with more configuration as opposed to just having a a basic URL or a very simple thing to display like the run flow buttons or having some kind of URL link available, but you want it to look nicer, like with the configuration options of a tile. Now we know exactly how we can do that and how you can configure these tiles to build exactly what you want to in Decisions. Thank you for watching.